commissar of the regiment in the doorway of the barracks. I was not confused. I gave the command, "Attention!" And then the commissar came up to me and asked me, "Are you approved to give a polit information?" I answered that it was to be held by the deputy political commissar, but for some reason he did not show up, and so we, under the guidance of the squadron commander, decided to repeat the material passed at the political classes. The commissar praised us for not wasting time, and then asked, "Have you studied this subject before? What kind of education do you have?" "Like everyone else, comrade commissar," I answered. I had not studied it before, but I remembered well what our leader told us 2 days ago. The commissar praised me for my efforts and left. And of course, he inquired about my biography, and then instructed the commissar to talk to me about my desire to become a cadre commander of the Red Army. That's the whole story. But then, squadron commander on the second day again called me to himself. He said, "There's an enrollment in Tambov and Proskurov military schools. Which one would you like to go to study at?" "I do not intend to stay in the army for life," I answered, "but I fulfilled my duty as a citizen of the Soviet Union and will do it honestly. After serving 2 years, I want to return home to teach children again." A captain from the headquarters, who entered the office at that time, also joined our conversation. Together with the squadron commander, he began to convince me of the advantages of serving as a cadre commander. Both of them emphasized that it was great to be a cavalryman. And that finally touched my soul. Yes, I really liked the beautiful uniforms of cavalry commanders. Slender, youthful posture, uniforms fitted and ironed, boots shine, tightly tightened straps at every movement make a specific, very pleasant, squeak, crimson-ringing spurs. In addition, I am connected with horses since childhood. How many times I used to drive them at night to work on them. But to connect my whole life with the army, no, I couldn't dare to do that. That's why I flatly refused to go to the school. Leaving the squadron commander, I thought that this is the end of it, that no one will no longer bother me. But a few days later I was summoned to the regimental commissar. In his reception room sat 6 Red Army men. They, too, as it turned out, were invited to talk about enrollment in the school. The conversation with the regimental commissar was short. Having heard my refusal, he only asked me, "Are you a Komsomol member?" I answered in the affirmative. "Well," he said, "we send you to study for a commander of the Red Army on the Komsomol voucher. There are 2 schools, Tambov and Proskurov. Which one would you like to go to?" Proskurov is a city in Ukraine. A picture dear to my heart immediately appeared before my eyes. Endless expanses of wheat fields, rows of slender pyramidal poplar trees framing the outskirts of villages. I saw blossoming collective farm orchards spread over dozens or even hundreds of hectares, and small cherry orchards near the houses of collective farmers. It is over them in quiet, warm evenings that the ringing voices of girls singing melodious Ukrainian songs float. In general, if the Komsomol order was to go to Proskurov. I looked up at the commissar and said, "Well, if the Komsomol sends me to study for a commander, I'm ready to go. I ask you to send me to Proskurov school. You'd better do it right away." Holding out his hand to me, the commissar smiled happily. "You have everything to become a good cadre commander. Pedagogical education, strong physique, inquisitive mind. Do you remember how you explained the material to the Red Army? Captivated the audience. So, you'll be able to enthuse the soldiers into battle. Good luck." A few days later, I and 5 of my comrades, also selected as candidates for the Proskurov military school, were already sitting in the compartment of a passenger train. So almost 3 years ago, my fate turned abruptly. And if you asked me then whether it was for the better or for the worse, honestly, I would have said the latter. But now I was grateful to those who determined this new path in my life. The knowledge I received in Proskurovsky and then in Bilotsakovsky military school, which was later transferred to Tomsk, the experience gained during the months of service in Transbaikalia. And finally, this war confirmed me in my opinion. There is no more difficult, but the most honourable profession of a commander. After all, he teaches the people entrusted to him the main thing, to protect the motherland. When my orderly and I were returning to our base, the rumble of tank engines could be heard in the woods, which was blue nearby in our rear. It was growing, getting closer, and in a few minutes from behind the turn of the highway appeared one, then another and a third armoured vehicles. The first two were T-34 tanks, but the third one, I had never seen such tanks before. As they approached us, the vehicles stopped. A man got out of the turret of the lead tank. He jumped down on the ground and came towards us. "Great," he said, putting his hand to his tank helmet. He introduced himself. "Senior Lieutenant Kovalev. I called myself too." "Wait, wait," said the tanker, smiling. "So you are the commander of the 1st Battalion?" "I am." "On the catcher, as they say, and the beast runs. I'm coming to you. I've got a task from the commander himself to ambush your sector. I've been ordered not to let a single tank through on Varshavka, and I won't. See how handsome they are." The senior lieutenant waved his hand in the direction of the tanks. "Tell me, what kind of car is that? That one? The third one? Is it a new brand?" "That's a KV, brother. Not a single shell can take its armour." "Well, we'll see. So you'll be ambushing them? I was told you'd put them in my defence." "No, we can't go on the defensive, only from ambushes. In short, where the Nazi tanks go, I'll go with mine. I'd better find a better place for the first time." "Maybe we'll look together. I've got orders to keep the Nazis off the highway too, so—" "All right, infantry, I agree. You take the cars off the road for now," I advised Kovalev. "And let your guys throw branches on them, because fascist planes bomb everything they see. And your tanks on the highway, like in the palm of their hands." "That's right," he agreed, and immediately ordered to camouflage the fighting vehicles in the forest. We moved on with Senior Lieutenant G.P. Kovalev. "Listen, friend," I began to introduce the tanker to the course of action. "I know every metre here, on the belly of the whole area, has been rounded. There are two vulnerable places in the battalion's defence. One is along the highway, the other is the right flank. We should cover them. What if you set up the main positions? For 2 tanks here, on the edge of the forest, 1 tank each on the right and left of the highway, huh? They'll get a good shot along the road and on the flanks if they need it. Well, and the 3rd tank? Leave it in the 2nd echelon, in the woods, by the side of the highway. If the fascist tanks break through, he will meet them. I have an idea about the reserve positions. Do you agree?" "No," shook his head Kovalev. "I have, as I told you, the order to act from ambushes. Over there in that forest, I will choose a clearing and there to meet the Krauts. But listen, if the Nazis break through my battalion's defences and break into the forest, your tanks will be in trouble. Fascists must be beaten together in a common defence system. And so— Look, there, in front, on 2 heights, you see trenches dug." I gave the binoculars to Kovalev. He held it up to his eyes and said, "I see trenches, but no men." "That's just it. There are trenches, but no men," I confirmed. "You see, there is no one to put in them. There are not enough men. I could barely cover the front. And if you don't hold the front, then what?" Kovalev narrowed his eyebrows thoughtfully. "That's what I'm getting at. You bury a couple of your tanks here, right and left of the highway. They look and cover these heights from guns and machine guns. What's not an ambush? And I'll have depth of defence. Agreed." Kovalev pulled a tank helmet over his eyebrows, scratched the back of his head, said uncertainly, "Here, on the left, on the edge of the forest, it would be possible, but to drive the tank to the right, behind the highway. The gap turns out." "Understand," I continued to persuade the tanker. "Well, you will stand with all your forces here, on this side of the highway, and the fascists will break through on the right. They'll come behind us and— What a devil you are, combat. smiled Kovalev, so painted that, "Okay, here will arrive my battalion commander, I'll report to him. As ordered, so I will act. When will he arrive?" "He promised by evening." "All right, and now let's find places for firing positions. And when your commander arrives, then we'll report our proposal to him." "Not ours, but yours," corrected Kovalev. "Well, let it be mine, although this is our common cause, right?" "All right, let's do it," agreed the senior lieutenant, and joked, "Our business is chauffeur business. Here we'll report to our superiors, and then as they decide, choosing together with Kovalev and his tank commanders filling positions for combat vehicles, I thought, here we are climbing, trying, and that tank commander will come. No, we should ask our regiment commander to come here. Let him force the tankers to change their decision, to give up ambushes and use tanks in the interests of the battalion defence. I should urgently run to my post, I finally told Kovalev. There is an urgent matter I had completely forgotten. And you please delay your commander if I'm a little late. I would like to report to him together with you about our estimates. Bosses are bosses, you can't delay them, smiled the senior lieutenant. But then he promised, all right, we'll try. I rushed to the observation post. Okay, answered me on the phone regimental commander. At what time will arrive his commander? Kovalev did not say the exact time. He said, by evening. Okay, wait for me at 15 o'clock. I want to see what you're up to, and then already to the tankers. After inspection of the work front in the second echelon of our defence, the regiment commander approved my decision and even praised me. Then we moved together to the tankers. At the edge of the forest, to the right of the highway, soon noticed 4 men in black coveralls. One of them, standing in the centre, showed the others with his hand somewhere to the right. They, I prompted the regiment commander, and their commander has arrived. You risk, comrades, approaching the tankers from the rear, said Captain Sedik. After all, the Nazis are only 800 metres away from here. He extended his hand to the tall tanker, introduced himself. He named himself, Captain Osipov, Battalion Commander of the 9th Tank Brigade. Then added, Here, I'm doing a reconnaissance of the terrain. I see where it would be better to place the tanks. I stared at the captain. Would he still insist on ambushes and forbid Kovalev? But no. Captain M.M. Osipov, to my great joy, began like this. Kovalev has already reported to me the opinion of your combat. Well, logically they have thought it over, but to cover the tanks, especially at night, it would be necessary to allocate at least a platoon of infantry. Because, you know, enemy machine gunners can sneak into the rear. Besides, we need to help the crews. Digging a trench for a tank is a big job. I was happy at his first words, and now I'm so measured. A whole rifle platoon? Where can I get a whole platoon? The defence is so thin as it is. We'll allocate it, Comrade Osipov. The regiment commander calmed the tanker. I looked reproachfully in his direction. Sedik winked at me as if to say, Be quiet. In addition, Osipov continued, to the tankers need a connection from you, Comrade Captain, and, it goes without saying, my men must be enrolled in your all types of allowances. Well, said the regiment commander, we will satisfy these requests too. It is true that we are a little short of men, but that's all right, we'll think of something. So it's a deal, as we say. And Sedik shook hands with Captain Osipov. Having said goodbye to everyone, the tank commander left, and the regiment commander, addressing me and Kovalev at the same time, said, That's what, my friends. Now you are connected by one rope. Both of you are responsible for the defence. You, tanker, all my commands will be received through him. Sedik nodded in my direction. But the platoon... I got another tingler somewhere under my spin. But Sedik, after a moment's thought, decisively waved his hand, promised Kovalev. The rifle platoon senior lieutenant, with the onset of darkness, will arrive at your disposal. I'll send them from another battalion. And me. Take all of them to yourself, Comrade Comulo. Tomorrow morning the firing positions must be open and well camouflaged. You'll report. And keep your eyes open, combat. Don't miss the beginning of the fascist offensive. Put the listeners closer to the wire. And also, today, let the regimental reconnaissance behind the front line. You need a tongue, in case of what you need help. At this, the regiment commander said goodbye to us and left for his place. The next day I worked with the commander of the artillery, attached to the battalion from the regiment, and then also with the commander of the mortar company. I clarified their firing tasks, tied it all to the terrain. Yes, the battalion clearly lacked artillery. The battery and mortar company, taken together, covered the stationary barrage fire only about 400 metres along the front, and the battalion's defence line stretched for almost 2.5 kilometres. That's where you come from. The commander of the mortar company, Junior Lieutenant Shapovalov, still equipped his observation post where I ordered him. He came to me with a report about it together with the political officer. Well done, I praised them, and asked, have not shot yet? Not yet. I would like, with your permission. OK. If everything is ready, then start. The junior lieutenant shot the main line in his direction, then an additional one. It looked good, but only I specified to him the second additional area as the firing positions of the mortar company collapsed enemy shells. And they lay down with remarkable accuracy. After the artillery attack, Shapovalov reported to me, several men were wounded, one mortar was put out of action. From what positions were you shooting? I asked him. From the old ones, which have now become reserve positions. Did you fire from them before? Yes, replied the company commander. Everything is clear. Hitlerites have long ago detected them, and now they were just waiting for the moment to strike. So make conclusions, Junior Lieutenant. Immediately move the company to the main positions. Cover the men and equipment. Don't be lazy to dig in. Make slits, niches. And after each shooting, change your firing position. A few more days of calm passed. During this time, our observers and artillery scouts detected about 18 enemy batteries, so the fascists are pulling up fresh forces. Every night, divisional and regimental scouts went for language. But they failed to capture a prisoner. The regimental commander, when asked about the data from above about the beginning of the enemy offensive, gave us the same answer. Get a tongue, then we will know. And we really soon caught a tongue. And what a tongue! It happened like this. One night my phone suddenly rang. Junior Lieutenant Yelinsky, excited voice reported, Comrade Combat, the soldiers brought a fascist. At first I did not even understand what it is about. What fighters? What fascist? A prisoner. 2 Hitlerites were riding on a motorcycle on the highway and by mistake they slipped by us. One of them was killed and the other with a briefcase was caught, and the motorcycle is intact. Bring him to me immediately. Make sure he doesn't get away. Put a guard on him. Half an hour later, there stood in front of me a big guy with long straw-coloured hair. Anger in his light, faded eyes under whitish lashes. On the narrow silver epaulettes there were 2 convex rectangles, judging by them, the captain, except that on the sleeve of his jacket, SS corner. SS? I asked. The fascist was silent. What's in his briefcase? I asked the sergeant who accompanied the prisoner. I don't know, Comrade Lieutenant, it's locked. The fascist won't give me the keys. I reported by phone to the regiment commander about the prisoner and his briefcase. What does he say? Asked Sedek. Silent. The briefcase is locked with 2 locks. No keys. Nothing. We'll open it. Send him to me. We'll make the commander happy. In the briefcase, as the regiment commander later told me, found a map with the situation and the decision of the commander of the 4th German Field Army. Division of the 4th Panzer Group in front of our front was no longer there. But this does not make it any easier. After all, according to the map, it turned out that against our division aimed now 2 Hitler's compounds from the 4th Field Army. They will strike the main blow along the Warsaw Highway. that is, through the defence of our battalion. Additional, through the forests on Narofominsky. Hold on, said the regiment commander at the end of the conversation. Soon we'll have to meet the guests, and thank you for the prisoner. It was a cloudy and rainy day. The soldiers were soaked, in the trenches and passages of communication, knee-deep in liquid mud. In the morning, the battalion commissar and I went around all the companies. Once again checked the system of fire, knowledge of the personnel of their tasks. We talked to people, told them about the prisoner, and that Hitlerites were preparing to go on the offensive in the near future. In spite of bad weather, the personnel was in a fighting mood. Moscow is behind us, Comrade Commissar. There is nowhere else to roll back, so we'll stand to the death. I heard the voice of a machine gunner, whose squad Ivan Ivanovich was just talking to. In the second half, we decided to visit the tankers. But just approaching the first trench, from which only the turret and the long barrel of the gun stood out, as Ivanov tugged me by the sleeve, he said, nodding towards the highway, "Look, a whole cavalcade of Emoks is standing. On the roadside, a few 100 metres from the edge of the forest, there was indeed a column of cars, and ahead of it, right on the highway, a group of servicemen were talking about something. I noted to myself, 2 of them in leather coats and military-style caps. Some big boss, apparently. As if the commissar guessed my thoughts. Maybe the commander. The commander has only one MK, and there are so many here. Let's go, Ivan Ivanovich. Let's report. The bosses are in our neighbourhood." We went along the highway ditch to the arrivals. They, too, moved from their places and went in our direction. Soon, in one of the approaching, I recognized the division commander, Major General K.M. Erastov. He was reporting something to a stocky man in a leather coat. To their left, also wearing the same coat, was a round-faced blond man with a grey beard. He, like our commander, had no insignia on his leather coat. What kind of people are these? A few dozen metres from the edge of the forest, the group stopped. From here the front edge of the defence of our battalion is viewed very well. The commissar and I slowed down, not daring to come closer to the group and interrupt the conversation. Meanwhile the stocky man brought binoculars to his eyes and began to examine the positions of the battalion. The division commander was explaining something to him. I kept my eyes on the commander's interlocutor. His movements were slow, stern face with a massive chin protruding forward, spoke of the extraordinary willpower of this man. But who is it? Who? But here, turning his head in our direction, this man apparently asked the commander who we were. Major General Erastov reported. "Come to me," imperiously ordered us a man in a leather coat. The commissar and I approached, introduced ourselves. Without taking my stern grey eyes, Stocky asked, "How long do you command the battalion?" "A week," I answered. "The battalion was taken in battle." "How did you build the defence?" I took out the scheme of defence, reported on it my decision. What was visible from here showed, and on the ground, not forgetting to mention the tanks, how we intend to use them in a defensive battle. "How many men in the companies?" asked the Stocky. 60 each. If we replenish the companies and bring their number to 70, 75 men. I began to express an idea that has long been sitting in my head. You could release one platoon from the front line and secondly saddle them on the highway, thereby deepening the battalion's defence. "So give him 100 men," ordered the stocky commander. "It's difficult, Comrade General of the Army," shook his head Erastov. "Other regiments have even fewer men, 40 to 45 people in companies." The one whom our division commander called the Army General lowered his head, stood in silence for a minute, thinking about something. Then he turned and said to the slender and handsome Lieutenant General standing behind him, "Vasily Danilovich, it is necessary to scrape up 1,500 fighters and give them to this division." "It's a bit heavy, Georgy Konstantinovich. You know that the Supreme Commander has forbidden to take reserves from the flanks." "I know. Take them anywhere. I'll be personally responsible for this before the Supreme Commander-in-Chief." Lieutenant General silently shrugged his shoulders. Well, what if you, combat, get replenishment but do not hold the occupied boundary? Asked the Army General, and strictly point-blank looked at me. We will hold. Then we will definitely hold, Comrade General of the Army, I answered firmly. He looked at me for a long time. His dark grey eyes seemed to be drilling through me, but I withstood his gaze. Look, the fascists must lay down their bones in front of your defence, do you understand? Not a step back, fight to the last bullet. Tell all the personnel of the battalion. Having said this, the Army General turned around, went to the car, got into it, and left. Do you even know, Lieutenant, with whom you just spoke? Asked me a colonel from the accompanying stocky man. No, I answered. Remember, this is the commander of the troops of the Western Front, said the colonel, and clapping me on the shoulder, saying, Do not be timid, ran to his car. So happened my acquaintance with one of our outstanding military leaders, Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov. Soon the battalion really arrived replenishment, 81 people, mostly militiamen, workers of Moscow factories. All of them were passionate patriots of the motherland, but unfortunately almost untrained in military affairs. Among the replenishment was a lot of my peers, moreover with similar fates to mine. In their early childhood, many of them, like me, had worked for the kulaks, for the factory owners, and on their backs walked whatever the master or the clerk could get his hands on. Just like me, only Soviet power opened the way to human life for them. The roads, of course, led us down different paths. I, for example, became a village teacher. They became highly qualified fitters, technicians, engineers. But we were united by one thing, love for the Soviet power, which gave us the happiness of life, the consciousness of great responsibility for it, and readiness to fight for our system to the last. And also, in the situation in which we found ourselves at the front, I had the only advantage over them. I was a cadre military man, and to tell the whole truth, I became one by no choice of my own. It happened like this. When the time came for me to go to military service, I even hid from the draft board that I have a completed secondary education. I really did not want to get into the regimental school, which selected the most literate fighters. Why? Because at that time junior officers served not for 2 years, as everyone else, but for 3. I dreamed as soon as possible to return to the guys, to the profession of a teacher, which I so much liked. But one day, when our platoon was practicing on the arena, the squadron commander, Senior Lieutenant Kleshchov, arrived. Having taken a report from the platoon leader, he called him aside for some reason. Talking among themselves, they looked in my direction every now and then. From this I realized that the conversation was about me. And indeed, after a few minutes, the platoon commander ordered, Red Army man Komulo, to the squadron commander. Senior Lieutenant Kleshchov immediately asked, What is your education, and what did you work before the army? I realized that my secret was out. Probably one of those guys with whom I was drafted in the same military enlistment centre, and even got into the same regiment. While I was thinking, who gave me away, Kleshchov asked a second question. Why are you hiding your education? I had to tell everything as if it were true. Kleshchov smiled and asked, And don't you want to be a Red Army commander? I shook my head negatively. That was the end of the conversation, and I was still a few days tormented by the thought, who gave the commander my secret? The clue was quite unexpected. After all, I gave myself away, it turns out, I myself. And under what circumstances? 1 week the deputy political commander had to hold a political briefing with the squadron. The modern reader probably does not imagine this category of political staff. Let me remind you, deputy political officers wore 4 triangles on their buttonholes, just like petty officers, but in addition they also wore a 5-pointed star stitched on their sleeve, exactly the same as the entire political staff of the Red Army. And this deputy political commander for some reason could not show up for the polit information. And then, after waiting for about 10 minutes, the squadron commander said, "Let's remember what happened at the last political training," and lifted me up, offering to answer the question. At the last classes, the leader told us about the republics that formed the Soviet Union. I had also told the students about them at school, so I knew the subject well. However, I remembered that I should not show my knowledge in full force, and I deliberately said some things inaccurately. Our petty officer was an excellent cavalryman. He knew and did his service perfectly well. But unfortunately, he had only 3 grades of education. It was not uncommon then. And after a few of his remarks, and clearly incompetent in this matter, I got carried away, forgot about the necessary restraint in the display of knowledge, began to prove what the petty officer was wrong. Having hung up a geographical map of the USSR, I began to show the borders of the republics and tell everything I knew about each of them. The Red Army soldiers, listening to me, sat as if mesmerized. But when I finished speaking, I noticed But let's go back to the difficult fall of the 41st year. So the battalion arrived replenishment. We immediately brought the number of companies to more than 80 people. Now it was finally possible to take in reserve a full-blooded platoon from the 3rd Rifle Company and place it in the 2nd echelon of the battalion. And it was already a lot. By the end of the 2nd day after the meeting with the commander, the artillery captain with his scouts and liaison officers came to my command post. "Captain Jadaneyev," he introduced himself, "arrived with a division to support your battalion. The division is approaching the area of firing positions. In 2 hours, it will be ready for battle." The captain looked about 30 years old, tight, slim, energetic. Shoulder straps tightly encased his slender figure. He and I quickly clarified his task, outlined the areas of stationary barrier lights. Then I asked, "And how do you think, Comrade Captain, to fight with tanks?" "You see, Lieutenant, I have artillery systems of 76mm caliber. If they are used for mobile barrage against tanks, the effect will be negligible. Consequently, it is necessary to conduct only self-defense fragmentation grenades, put on a landfill. Well, and in the course of the battle, anything can happen in it. Sometimes even a howitzer has to be rolled out at direct aiming. Yes, in the course of a battle all sorts of things happen. But when will it come, this battle? We've been waiting for the enemy offensive for a long time." In the meantime, November came. Frosts hardened the ground. A snowstorm swirled. Snow in a matter of days covered the defence with a white blanket. It became more difficult to carry out engineering works. But even before the onset of cold weather, we managed to do a lot. Trenches and passages were deepened to the full profile. Shelters for weapons were made. Dugouts for rest and heating of personnel were dug. The holiday of the 24th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution has also approached. We learned about the solemn meeting held in Moscow on the eve of this anniversary, about the parade of troops on Red Square from the Commissar of the regiment in the afternoon of November 7th. He telephoned Ivan Ivanovich and demanded to immediately bring this news to all the soldiers and commanders of the battalion. That was done. Naturally, the message raised our morale. Another week passed. At dawn on November 15th, we were awakened by a strong artillery cannonade, rumbling somewhere to the north. As it soon turned out, it was the German fascist command began to implement its plan to seize the Soviet capital by simultaneously bypassing it from the north and from the south. With the beginning of artillery firing, all the personnel of the battalion took their battle stations. But an hour, half a day, and then the whole day passed, and the enemy was still silent in front of us. And only on November 18th, enemy guns and mortars made a powerful fire attack on the battalion's defences. Hundreds of heavy shells and mines flew and burst in our direction. The upturned earth covered the trenches and passages. The artillery preparations seemed to have no end. Its rumbling seemed to subside for a moment, but then grew again with furious fury. To the left of my niche, a whole wall of the trench collapsed. Someone cried out in pain. Groans were heard. But now the bursts of shells became as if more rare. The dust in the trench began to settle. But no sooner had the artillery preparations subsided than fascist bombers roared low over the ground, wave after wave. True, for some reason they did not touch us. Apparently, they had the task of bombing the rear. And yet from minute to minute we must wait for dive bombers, I thought. And I was not mistaken. Almost immediately from somewhere in our rear to the positions of the battalion came at once 2 groups of Junkers, and again we were plunged into a pitch-black hell. But now the dive bombers were bombed. The enemy artillery transferred the fire from the front edge of our defence in depth. "Company commanders to the phone," I shouted to the signalman. "Signalman, a series of red rockets." I put binoculars to my eyes, and even on a superficial picture saw that the strongest fire hit the positions of the 1st Company and its neighbour on the right. Yes, the main blow Hitlerites, of course, planned to inflict not along the highway, but there, at our junction with the neighbouring division. The Commissar came and stood next to us, also pointed binoculars in the direction of the 1st Company. I shared with him my assumptions. "I think you're right, Commander. I went there, in the 1st Rifle Company, so let's just in case," the Commissar hugged me, "just in case." Without finishing his thought, Ivan Ivanovich turned abruptly and hurriedly walked along the message. One after another red rockets flew up into the sky. "This is the signal to the battalion. To battle." It was immediately duplicated in the 2nd and 3rd Companies, and the telephonist reported that the commanders of these units are in touch. But from the 1st Rifle, no response. Probably, Comrade Combat, the wire was broken. "Yelinsky, Ilarionov," I shouted into the phone. "Companies took the combat order?" "They are." "Hurry up! And fire on the infantry. Cut it off from the tanks." "Yes, Comrade Combat," answered the companies. "Have you reached the 1st Company, telephonist?" "Immediately the 1st Company." But there was still no connection with it. What to do? Meanwhile, enemy tanks crawled out of the ravines immediately after the artillery and air raids approached the front edge of our defences. Behind them, in columns of squads, hiding behind the armour, ran infantry. "I open fire, Comrade Combat," reported at this time the division commander, Captain Zhdaneyev. "Good. Give more fire in front of the positions of the 1st Company. There is no communication with her." "Understood," heard from the tube short, and I again shouted to the telephonist, "Call the tanker! Hurry up!" But in a minute the telephonist reported that the tankers didn't answer either. "It's not getting any better by the hour." "But what is it?" The telephonist jumped up from his seat, pulls me the phone, shouting happily, "Comrade Combat, the 1st Company." The 1st Company on the phone sounded at the other end of the wire, barely audible and seemingly unfamiliar voice. "Who's at the phone?" "Company Petty Officer Sidorov," answered from the phone. "I report. The company commander is seriously wounded. I sent for the 2nd Platoon Commander, Lieutenant Filipov." "Do you have the battalion commissar?" "He recently went to you." "I haven't seen him yet, Comrade Combat." "Listen to me carefully, Sidorov. Tell Lieutenant Filipov, and while he's coming, give a command to the company to open fire with all kinds of weapons on the infantry. Understood? Infantry. Cut them off from the tanks." "Junkers!" shouted someone nearby. And at the same moment a column of fire erupted before my eyes. Then something hit me painfully in the chest and head, burned my face. It seemed that I was falling into some dark abyss. When I woke up, I saw the telephonist. He was squatting in front of me, and for some reason was tearing off the sleeve of his shirt. My head was ringing. I tried to move it. It hurt. I tried to get up from the bottom of the trench, where I was thrown down by an air wave from a bomb that exploded almost next to me. Again, a sharp pain in the back of my head. Something warm dripped down the collar of my uniform. With difficulty I threw up my arm, felt the back of my head. Fingers touched the sticky wound, and again the searing pain. The telephonist helped me to sit down, ineptly wrapped my head with the sleeve of his shirt. But why not a bandage? However, it didn't matter. Leaning on his shoulder, I got to my feet. The pain in my head pounded me with a fiery iron, and my eyes darkened. But I held on, blinked. He saw, enemy tanks are very close, and the infantry. "Why isn't anyone firing?" I shouted to the telephonist. But I didn't even hear my own voice. I only see the telephonist holding the telephone receiver with both hands and opening and closing his mouth. But I don't hear his voice either. Concussed, it flashed in my head. Yes, it seems so. But how to command the battalion now? However, I can talk. Suddenly I saw Captain V.P. Zhdaneyev next to me. P. Zhdaneyev. Why is he here? Although, from my command post, it's easier for him to command his division. From here, the battlefield is like in the palm of his hand. I noticed how one of the artillery scouts touched the captain by the sleeve of his overcoat, shouted something in his ear. Zhdaneyev took the binoculars away from his eyes and looked in my direction. Then he pursed his lips and stretched his hand forward. By this gesture I realized that the division was firing at the enemy. I also fixed my eyes on the binoculars. I saw our artillery shells tearing between enemy tanks. But why none of them are burning? And the machine gunners? They are not cut off either, are they? Why aren't the companies firing? I shout to the telephonist. All fire! Hear me, all fire! I think you're right, Commander. I went there in the 1st Rifle Company, so let's just in case. The Commissar hugged me, just in case. Without finishing his thought, Ivan Ivanovich turned abruptly and hurriedly walked along the message. One after another red rockets flew up into the sky. This is the signal to the battalion. To battle. It was immediately duplicated in the 2nd and 3rd companies, and the telephonist reported that the commanders of these units are in touch. But from the 1st Rifle, no response. Probably, Comrade Combat, the wire was broken. Yelinsky, Ilarionov, I shouted into the phone. Companies took the combat order? They are. Hurry up, and fire on the infantry. Cut it off from the tanks. Yes, Comrade Combat, answered the companies. Have you reached the 1st Company, telephonist? Immediately the 1st Company. But there was still no connection with it. What to do? Meanwhile, enemy tanks crawled out of the ravines immediately after the artillery and air raids approached the front edge of our defences. Behind them, in columns of squads, hiding behind the armour, ran infantry. I open fire, Comrade Combat, reported at this time the division commander, Captain Zhdaneyev. Good. Give more fire in front of the positions of the 1st Company. There is no communication with her. Understood, heard from the tube short, and I again shouted to the telephonist, Call the tanker! Hurry up! But in a minute the telephonist reported that the tankers didn't answer either. It's not getting any better by the hour. But what is it? The telephonist jumped up from his seat, pulls me the phone, shouting happily, Comrade Combat, the 1st Company. The 1st Company on the phone sounded at the other end of the wire, barely audible and seemingly unfamiliar voice. Who's at the phone? Company Petty Officer Sidorov, answered from the phone. I report. The company commander is seriously wounded. I sent for the 2nd Platoon Commander, Lieutenant Filipov. Do you have the battalion commissar? He recently went to you. I haven't seen him yet, Comrade Combat. Listen to me carefully, Sidorov. Tell Lieutenant Filipov, and while he's coming, give a command to the company to open fire with all kinds of weapons on the infantry. Understood? Infantry. Cut them off from the tanks. Junkers, shouted someone nearby. And at the same moment a column of fire erupted before my eyes. Then something hit me painfully in the chest and head, burned my face. It seemed that I was falling into some dark abyss. When I woke up, I saw the telephonist. He was squatting in front of me, and for some reason was tearing off the sleeve of his shirt. My head was ringing. I tried to move it. It hurt. I tried to get up from the bottom of the trench, where I was thrown down by an air wave from a bomb that exploded almost next to me. Again, a sharp pain in the back of my head. Something warm dripped down the collar of my uniform. With difficulty I threw up my arm, felt the back of my head. Fingers touched the sticky wound, and again the searing pain. The telephonist helped me to sit down, ineptly wrapped my head with the sleeve of his shirt. But why not a bandage? However, it didn't matter. Leaning on his shoulder, I got to my feet. The pain in my head pounded me with a fiery iron, and my eyes darkened. But I held on, blinked. He saw, enemy tanks are very close, and the infantry. "Why isn't anyone firing?" I shouted to the telephonist. But I didn't even hear my own voice. I only see the telephonist holding the telephone receiver with both hands and opening and closing his mouth. But I don't hear his voice either. "Concussed," it flashed in my head. Yes, it seems so. But how to command the battalion now? However, I can talk. Suddenly I saw Captain V.P. Zhdaneyev next to me. P. Zhdaneyev. Why is he here? Although, from my command post, it's easier for him to command his division. From here, the battlefield is like in the palm of his hand. I noticed how one of the artillery scouts touched the captain by the sleeve of his overcoat, shouted something in his ear. Zhdaneyev took the binoculars away from his eyes and looked in my direction. Then he pursed his lips and stretched his hand forward. By this gesture I realized that the division was firing at the enemy. I also fixed my eyes on the binoculars. I saw our artillery shells tearing between enemy tanks. But why none of them are burning? And the machine gunners? They are not cut off either, are they? "Why aren't the companies firing?" I shout to the telephonist. "All fire! Hear me, all fire!" The telephonist says something to me, but I can't hear him. And then Junior Lieutenant Akatyev, who was also watching the battlefield, came up, touched me, stretched his right hand forward, bent and unbent his index finger several times. I realized that the companies had been firing for a long time, and indeed, in the chains of the enemy infantry here and there fell figures, and here in front of the front edge of our defence caught fire at once several tanks. On the soul was relieved. In front of the positions of the 2nd Company, the fascist chain lay down. Of the 8 tanks that were moving in that direction, 3 caught fire. The rest slowed down. Then one more burst into flames. Tanks began to surrender back. On the defence of the 1st Company already crawling several Nazi tanks. Did her fighters trembled, withdrew? No way. 1st Company, let's go, 1st Company. Akatyev, ask what they have there, why miss the tanks? I ordered the battalion adjutant. And where are our tanks? Junior Lieutenant Akatyev, holding the tube at his ear, listened to something, showed me a hand in the direction of the edge of the forest. I guess that Kovalev's vehicles are moving to the right flank. Well, the right decision. But it's going to be hot here too. Akatyev, I touched the junior lieutenant's shoulder. Listen to me. Reserve squad from the 2nd Company with 1 ATGM, urgently here, to the command post, and all those who are free here, place in the course of the message on the right front to the 1st Company. We need to delay enemy tanks and infantry, not to let them to the rear of the 2nd Company. Understood, Akatyev. The junior lieutenant nodded his head affirmatively. Captain Zhdaneyev, prepare a barrage in front of the defence of the 2nd echelon of the battalion. Cut off the German slobs from the tanks with shrapnel. And I am over there, showed towards the trenches of the 1st Company. Mortar Company commander, with me. Pull the connection for us. Low ducking, we ran along the message on the right flank of the battalion. Halfway there, we ran nose to nose with the reserve platoon commander. He was probably rushing to my CP. Everyone to the right flank. Without going into any details, I commanded him. At the highway leave 1-hand machine gun, the rest, follow me. German tanks, here they are, close by. And then came the men of the reserve platoon, calculations of anti-tank guns. Now we'll scare them off. I give the command to open fire, and myself anxiously thinking, where are our tanks? Will Kovalev do as we agreed? Yes, we had agreed in advance that in case of Hitler's breakthrough in this direction, Kovalev would put the rifle platoon that was guarding him on the tanks and come here. or rather over there, a little behind, where the trenches for his tanks are equipped. The vehicles occupy their trenches, and the rifle platoon moves forward into this trench so that together with my reserve, also a rifle platoon, to plug the neck of the breakthrough. And now the reserve is with me, but where is Kovalev and his platoon? Although, after all, the adjutant of the battalion reported to me that the tanks began to move here on the right flank, so they'll be here now. We were already in full force fighting with tanks and infantry of the enemy, who broke through the defence of the 1st Company when the rifle platoon arrived, attached to Kovalev. "Where is Kovalev?" I pounced on the platoon. Junior lieutenant at first confused, and then showed me at the edge of the forest. "Two!" I spread out 2 fingers in front of him. The junior lieutenant nodded. "Yes, 2 tanks arrived and took their trenches behind us. Well done, Kovalev. Did not let us down. Take the defence on the right of the reserve platoon," I commanded the junior lieutenant, "and immediately fire on the fascists." He nodded again and, waving to his men, ran down the trench. And the German tanks, which had crawled back into the gully, went on the attack again. There seemed to be even more of them, and more infantry too. No other way the fascist command decided to develop the success that had been outlined before, to break through the corridor in our defence. Yes, it's going to be especially hot now. After all, what can we oppose this armoured wave here? Add a mortar company to the fire of an artillery division? Yes, Junior Lieutenant Shapovalov is right here, with a telephone receiver in his hand at the ready. And the rest? 2 incoming tanks, 3 anti-tank guns, and 2 platoons of infantry? Not enough. We need at least a platoon here. But where would we get it from? What if... from the 3rd Company? Yes, that's a solution, but how do I pass the order? Connections. Time is of the essence, although Shapovalov has a connection with the firing positions, and the mortars are not far from the battalion command post. I shouted to Junior Lieutenant Shapovalov to call the chief at the positions, and through him to pass my order to Akatiev about the platoon from the 3rd Company. And again a new thought is working hard. It would be good to turn the platoon from the 2nd Company front on the fascists. From his flanking fire, Hitlerites would have been hard. We must send a smart fighter to Yelinsky with this order. But who? Of course my orderly Sergeyev. He's quick on his feet. And he used to serve with me in this company. He still goes to his friends. He knows all the nooks and crannies of the 2nd Rifles' defences. He'll get through. "Sasha! I'm calling Sergeyev's name. Quickly to the 2nd Company. Tell Yelinsky to turn 1 platoon to the right and open fire in the flank of the fascists. Let him put there and a couple of anti-tank guns to hit the sides of the tanks, and machine guns to cut off the infantry. Understood?" Sergeyev, trumpeted, ran along the course of the message. While he was instructing the orderly, the enemy tanks came so close that it seemed that the ground even slightly trembled from their progress. "It's time." I waved my hand. A silent signal through Shapovalov turns into a command and flies over the wires to the positions of artillerymen and mortarmen. At the same time, machine guns, automatic rifles, anti-tank rifles began to speak amicably. From behind, ringingly struck from the trenches, 2 tanks, Kovalev. In the ranks of the enemy, panic. 3 TVs caught fire. The infantry lay down. But it lasted for 5 or 6 minutes, no more. Then Hitlerites, obeying someone's command, rose again, went forward. Tanks also increased their speed. A platoon from the 3rd Company arrived, and immediately joined the fight. But the fascists are pressing, and at the most critical moment they were hit in the flank by machine gun bursts and machine gun fire. Well done, Sergeyev. He managed to give everything to Yelinsky. Now the Hitlerites trembled finally. Their surviving tanks turned around, increased speed, and rolled back, leaving their infantry to their fate. We withstood, but the right neighbour was worse. The enemy tanks and infantry had penetrated into his defence for 2 kilometres. Twilight came quickly. Taking advantage of the lull, I began to analyse the situation in the battalion. The 2nd and 3rd Companies firmly hold their positions. The 1st Company's defences are half destroyed. Now there are reconstruction work. In short, things are not so bad. That's exactly what I reported to the regimental commander who came to me at the CP. Captain Sedic listened to me carefully, said, "Yes, your battalion fought well, but others also did not stand idle. All enemy attacks on the 2nd and 3rd Battalions repulsed with heavy losses for him." I looked dumbfounded at the regimental commander. I couldn't even believe that I could hear his voice again. "But I hear it, I hear it." I couldn't remember myself from joy. I jumped up and laughed loudly. "What's the matter with you, Homulo?" Captain Sedic asked in surprise. "Yes, I can hear you, Comrade Captain, I can hear you." And, having regretted, explained, "I, you see, was stunned by a bomb in the morning. I was deaf during the whole battle, and now—" "That's what it is," stretched out Sedic. "So you were leading the battalion when you were shell-shocked? Well done. I didn't know, honestly. I didn't know. But never mind. We'll talk about it later. Listen to me. Take off your 3rd Company by morning. The 2nd Battalion will take over its defence. But quietly, so that the fascists don't notice anything. And continue with the forces of the 3rd Company and those who stayed in the 1st to restore the defence. Is the task clear?" "Clear." "Only I ask you to bring me more mines and other ammunition," I asked, "including for the artillery division." "OK," promised Sedic, and immediately asked, "What is actually with the 1st Company?" Its left flank platoon all the time held its position. Losses in it are small. The other 2 platoons are badly battered. There are only a few men left in each of them. By the way, the battalion commissar is still in this company. He was in it during the battle. What's the connection with the companies? After all, they were preparing dinner for all, but there was hardly a third left in the ranks, Ivan Ivanovich bitterly noted. I introduced the commissar to the situation, told about the task to be accomplished at dawn, then suggested at least an hour to rest. But Ivanov said that he could hardly sleep now, so we left the dugout. It got sharply colder. Dense clouds were low over the ground. It was snowing. Gusty wind was blowing it across the field, tearing off the remnants of dry leaves from a nearby shrubbery. I thought, it was good that, as the commander of the economic platoon reported, the regiment had already received warm underwear, felt boots, mittens, and for the command staff, sheepskin coats. 30-degree frosts are not far off. At dawn we moved to a new observation post, which our men had hardly equipped in the frozen ground. When we were settling down, we could hear the engines of tanks roaring in the enemy's rear. "Are they stalling or what?" someone said. "No, they are warming up their engines," said the commissar. "At this temperature they can't start them at once." "So the enemy is getting ready. Didn't he get enough yesterday? Let him get on with it. And today he will get no less than yesterday," said one of the fighters. And he said it in a casual, calm, confident way. And that pleased me. So the fighters felt their strength. At 6 o'clock called the regiment commander, reported to him about the readiness of the battalion to fulfill the task. "The beginning at 8, said Captain Sedic. "Let's help the right neighbour to restore the defence. It's in our interests, understand? Good luck. I informed the artillery division commander who was nearby about the beginning of the fire training. At 8 o'clock, then, Staniev frowned. It will still be a little dark, it will be difficult to take aim. But I'll try, maybe I'll succeed. And the weather today is not the best. Snow, blizzard." He repeated, "I'll try," clarified the tasks of Junior Lieutenant Akatiev, commanders of the reserve platoon and tank guards. And still a doubt gnawed at my heart. Akatiev had little experience. Would he be able to cope? I decided I would lead the attack of his company and the reserve myself. There was a conversation with the commanders of the 2nd and 3rd companies. Their task was to repel the Hitlerites' attacks from the front, not to let them break through the battalion's defence at the moment when our main attention would be turned to the right flank, to the neighbour. For Senior Lieutenant Kovalev had to send a liaison. He appeared a few minutes later, said dejectedly, "There was only one tank left, combat, do you understand? Or rather, two, but the one at the highway, I can't take off, I'm afraid to risk it. And one 30-checker got damage to the undercarriage yesterday evening. A chuck knocked out the torsion bar and tore the track. The repairmen are working on it now. Maybe they'll put it back in service by the beginning of the events." "It would be good," I said, "to support the riflemen with fire from two tanks, a great thing. I have almost no machine guns left in the first company. And with a rifle, how much can you fight? So you hurry up the repairmen, let them hurry up. They're doing a good job. They're working like animals. They understand too. Well, I'm off." Kovalev corrected the tank helmet on his head. Once again clarified. "So, at 8? Good." In the east, slowly, as if reluctantly, dawn was breaking. Heavy snow clouds continued to creep low from west to east. The snow drizzle was getting heavier by the minute. It was time to go to the first company, once again to clarify the task, to cheer up the new company. Akatiev and I found him surrounded by soldiers. Small in stature, stocky. He stood among them and said something loudly, gesticulating. When we approached, Junior Lieutenant Akatiev commanded, "Attention," and clearly reported. He had a kind of belligerent look. There was no shadow of confusion on his face or in his eyes. That pleased me. Well done, I thought, trying before the battle to raise the spirits of his subordinates. Well, let him lead them into the attack. It was getting brighter by the hour. Through the snowstorm, though foggy but still visible yesterday's battlefield, mottled with bursts of shells and mines, with trees whose tops had been knocked off. I once again clarified to the company commander the plan of the upcoming battle, the task of his units and neighbours, told Akatiev, and the actions of the 51st Regiment. While the junior lieutenant and I worked on the terrain, the commissar talked to the personnel. Yesterday he had gotten to know many people here, and today he was having a friendly conversation with the soldiers. Ivan Ivanovich gave them a farewell, reminding them that in the attack should be as much as possible to shoot small arms, to hit first of all machine guns of the enemy. "Today," he said in conclusion, "we must restore the front edge of the defence at the right neighbour, and for a long time to discourage the fascists from sticking their noses into Oos." We returned to the observation post at 7 hours and 40 minutes. The commanders of the artillery division and mortar company reported that everything was ready for the artillery preparation. At that moment a shout was heard on the left side of the trench. "Stop! Who's coming?" "Our own!" I recognised the voice of our former commander, and now the commander of the 51st Regiment, D.F. Kletnov. "Here, comrade captain," I called him, Kletnov, and with him 8 more men came to us. "No sooner had I left the battalion than you have already forgotten your commander," Kletnov said in a creaky voice, extending his hand to me. I reported to him that I was ready to support the regiment's attack. To participate in the artillery preparation involved Art Division and Mortar Company. Then 2 tanks and a rifle company go into counter-attack together with units of his regiment. "That's good. Just don't spare the fire," Kletnov asked. "To beat so beat the enemy, really. Otherwise you see what happens. If yesterday we held out, then he'll just go to the right neighbour. Isn't that rude?" "But nothing. We'll teach him a lesson today." "Comrade Petrov," he turned to one of his commanders, "deploy the radio station and get in touch with the battalion commanders. Time is running out. We still have to report to the division commander. Where would be a better place for you, Komolo?" I advised him to position himself and his control group in the trench on my right, reasoning that the battalion company would attack on the left of his regiment's fighting order. "And from here it will be more convenient for you and me to control the battle." "Right," agreed Kletnov and looked at his watch. I also looked at mine. The hands showed 7 hours and 45 minutes. Yes, time was flying fast. It was almost dawn. At exactly 8 Iarwaras, our artillery opened fire on the enemy. On the line of the old observation post, to the right and left of it, battalions of Kletnov's regiment began to deploy in pre-battle order, and with this they made an unforgivable mistake. After all, during yesterday's day, the trench where this observation post was located had been shelled by enemy artillery and, of course, was well shot. And now it was worth to appear in it battalion columns, as there immediately flew dozens of shells. True, the combatants were not confused. Throwing over this trench, the regiment's units began to deploy in a clear field in combat order, and soon, with shouts of hurrah, battalions rushed at the enemy. But what about my first company? Why it does not rise? Even Kovalev's tanks have already gone forward, and she... And then I remembered. Rockets. After all, I warned Akatiev that the signal to attack is a series of red rockets. And then... Brailovsky. A series of red rockets towards the first company. Now! I shouted with all my might. Several red rockets soared into the sky. Immediately the men of the first company jumped out of the trenches and rushed to the attack. I breathed a sigh of relief, and cursed myself in the shower. Because carried away by the actions of battalions of Kletnov's regiment, I completely forgot about the signal for my company. Yes, Commander, be more attentive in battle. Meanwhile, the battle was heating up, came into full force. The density of Hitlerites' fire on our advancing units increased, but the soldiers could not be stopped. Here they got closer to the enemy, launched grenades, silenced fascist machine guns. Well, now begins the climax of the battle, hand-to-hand combat. Will the Nazis withstand it? No, they can't. Here they are, jumping out of the trenches, retreating, shooting on the move. The fire is not aimed. There are few losses from it, and it gives our fighters an opportunity to move forward even faster. But what is it? One of Kovalev's tanks suddenly caught fire. The crew jumped out of it, crawled away. The other tank rushes further, shooting the fleeing Hitlerites with machine gun fire. But soon it stops too, turns back. I understand. Kovalev does not risk to continue pursuit with one tank. Well, everything is right. It is necessary to take care of the car, or just in case some desperate fascist with a grenade will meet on its way, then we need tanks very much, so thank Kovalev for that. While the junior lieutenant and I worked on the terrain, the commissar talked to the personnel. Yesterday he had gotten to know many people here, and today he was having a friendly conversation with the soldiers. Ivan Ivanovich gave them a farewell, reminding them that in the attack should be as much as possible to shoot small arms to hit first of all machine guns of the enemy. Today, he said in conclusion, we must restore the front edge of the defence at the right neighbour and for a long time to discourage the fascists from sticking their noses into Oos. We returned to the observation post at 7 hours and 40 minutes. The commanders of the artillery division and mortar company reported that everything was ready for the artillery preparation. At that moment a shout was heard on the left side of the trench. "Stop! Who's coming?" "Our own!" I recognized the voice of our former commander, and now the commander of the 51st Regiment, D.F. Kletnov. "Here, comrade captain," I called him, Kletnov, and with him 8 more men came to us. "No sooner had I left the battalion than you have already forgotten your commander," Kletnov said in a creaky voice, extending his hand to me. I reported to him that I was ready to support the regiment's attack. To participate in the artillery preparation involved Art Division and Mortar Company. Then 2 tanks and a rifle company go into counter-attack together with units of his regiment. "That's good. Just don't spare the fire," Kletnov asked. "To beat the enemy, really. Otherwise, you see what happens. If yesterday we held out, then he'll just go to the right neighbour. Isn't that rude? But nothing. We'll teach him a lesson today. Comrade Petrov," he turned to one of his commanders, "deploy the radio station and get in touch with the battalion commanders. Time is running out. We still have to report to the division commander. Where would be a better place for you, Komolo?" I advised him to position himself and his control group in the trench on my right, reasoning that the battalion company would attack on the left of his regiment's fighting order. And from here it will be more convenient for you and me to control the battle. Right, agreed Kletnov and looked at his watch. I also looked at mine. The hands showed 7 hours and 45 minutes. Yes, time was flying fast. It was almost dawn. At exactly 8 Iarwaras, our artillery opened fire on the enemy. On the line of the old observation post, to the right and left of it, battalions of Kletnov's regiment began to deploy in pre-battle order, and with this they made an unforgivable mistake. After all, during yesterday's day, the trench where this observation post was located had been shelled by enemy artillery and, of course, was well shot. And now it was worth to appear in it battalion columns, as there immediately flew dozens of shells. True, the combatants were not confused. Throwing over this trench, the regiment's units began to deploy in a clear field in combat order, and soon, with shouts of hurrah, battalions rushed at the enemy. But what about my first company? Why it does not rise? Even Kovalev's tanks have already gone forward, and she... And then I remembered. Rockets. After all, I warned Akatiev that the signal to attack is a series of red rockets. And then... Brailovsky. A series of red rockets towards the first company. Now! I shouted with all my might. Several red rockets soared into the sky. Immediately the men of the first company jumped out of the trenches and rushed to the attack. I breathed a sigh of relief, and cursed myself in the shower. Because carried away by the actions of battalions of Kletnov's regiment, I completely forgot about the signal for my company. Yes, Commander, be more attentive in battle. Meanwhile, the battle was heating up, came into full force. The density of Hitlerites' fire on our advancing units increased, but the soldiers could not be stopped. Here they got closer to the enemy, launched grenades, silenced fascist machine guns. Well, now begins the climax of the battle, hand-to-hand combat. Will the Nazis withstand it? No, they can't. Here they are jumping out of the trenches, retreating, shooting on the move. The fire is not aimed. There are few losses from it, and it gives our fighters an opportunity to move forward even faster. But what is it? One of Kovalev's tanks suddenly caught fire. The crew jumped out of it, crawled away. The other tank rushes further, shooting the fleeing Hitlerites with machine gun fire. But soon it stops too, turns back. I understand. Kovalev does not risk to continue pursuit with one tank. Well, everything is right. It is necessary to take care of the car, or just in case some desperate fascist with a grenade will meet on its way, then... We need tanks very much, so thank Kovalev for that. Even before sunrise, their powerful artillery fire fell on the defence of our troops. And then Junkers spun the familiar Ferris wheel over us. Again sprinkled on the ground bombs, then empty barrels, scraps of rails, howling airplane sirens. But the nerves of our people were not the same as at the first bombing. A good half of the personnel had been in battle, got a good hardening, learned stamina. And most importantly, the fighters believed in their strength, in the reliability of shelters. In addition, as mentioned above, the companies increased the layer of communists and Komsomol members, who were a cementing force among the fighters, reliable assistants to commanders and political workers. I, for example, still remember one of them, Alexei Kirillovich Nikolaev. He was from the militia. Before the war he worked as a turner at the factory named after Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. He came to us as a machine gunner, and one day Alexei Kirillovich told us about himself. He fought in World War I, and also a machine gunner. He started the civil war near Kastonaya, fought against Denikin. The war ended in the Crimea. He was wounded near Perekop. He's been a party member since the spring of 1920. How could such a man falter in battle? No way. On the contrary, he will draw others to the feat by personal example, and there were many such as A.K. Nikolaev in the battalion. What is not a support for me, the commander? And for the commissar, too. but this is about people. There was also another significant detail that increased the combat effectiveness of the battalion. The fact that the number of automatic weapons in the companies, we were also different. As a rule, the new recruits arrived to us not with the usual 3-line rifles, but with new automatic weapons. In addition, the battalion now had 6 Maxim and 22 handheld machine guns. All this, taken together, gave birth not only to us, the political commanders, but also to all the soldiers' confidence that the Nazis will not pass. It seemed that there would be no end to the continuous rumbling, scraping, rumbling of tearing metal, howling sirens of airplanes. Everything around was covered with smoke, cinders, and thick dust. Somewhere trenches and shelters were covered with earth. Especially intensively, the enemy worked the centre of the regiment's combat order, the left flank of our battalion and the 2nd Battalion, defending on the left. Here, Hitler's artillerymen even made several false transfers of fire to the rear of our defences, to then, with new force, to bring it down on the front line. It was becoming clear that the enemy would strike his main blow in the centre of the regiment's fighting order. But now the planes flew away, and the artillery cannonade began to subside. Following this on our defence crawled tanks and dense chains of infantry. By the way, the Nazis had already managed to make white camouflage for tanks, under the colour of the winter landscape, and some of the infantry dressed in the same white camouflage robes. At this time in the sky appeared 3 Red Star Hawks, between them and 5 Messers' fierce air battle. But there is no time to watch it. Now we will be hot. Closer and closer, enemy tanks are rolling up to the battalion's defence. The infantry, driven by officers' shouts, also increased their pace. At the battalion observation post, tension. Next to me stands Junior Lieutenant Akatyev, holding a rocket launcher and impatiently waiting for my command. The telephonist, straining his voice, calls the companies, repeating the same words. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, do you hear? But here I turn to Akatyev, nod my head to him. He throws his hand up, pulls the trigger. A rocket hisses into the sky. That's the signal. Fire all! At the same time I hear Captain Zhdaneyev's long and loud command, tighten the cords! After a short pause, a continuation. To the division, Enzeo, Maple, fire. Above us, shells rustle and burst ahead of the positions of the 2nd Company. Pillars of fire and smoke cover several German tanks and fleeing infantry. Target! Zhdaneyev's voice sounded again. The aim is smaller. But our machine guns and automatic rifles began to rumble. In their rattle are intertwined sharper shots of rifles. Enemy infantrymen respond with fire from the move, pointing jumping automatic rifles at their bellies. Some of them fall and never rise again. In binoculars well viewed all the terrain in front of our defences. I count 18 tanks and up to a regiment of infantry advancing on the battalion. Of these, 15 armoured vehicles, and dense chains of machine gunners aim directly at the 2nd and 3rd companies. Here also rushes and the 2nd echelon of the enemy regiment. Yes, the enemy infantry chains are very dense. If you look with the naked eye, it seems, moving solid grey-white wall, and only with binoculars you can see small intervals between individual soldiers and units. Some tanks have already opened fire from cannons, hitting our defences from long range. We already know this pattern, which boils down to calling in premature fire from our anti-tank weapons, and then spot them and... But this time the provocation of German tankers did not succeed. All our soldiers and commanders have long ago learned that heavy fire from all weapons on enemy tanks and infantry should be opened only when they will roll up in columns to overcome the passages in minefields and wire fences. So they wait. In front of the 2nd Company, the Nazis have already made 2 passes, to which immediately rushed 8 tanks. First, in the passage entered the car, from the half-open hatch of which every now and then flew green rockets. So, this is the tank of the commander. It would be good for our Paterovtsi to hit it directly on the passage, so that it would not allow others to overcome the minefield. I continue to watch this tank with binoculars. Here it has already passed half of the passage. I can see very well how slowly, as if sniffing, the turret with a gun creeps from side to side. A big scoundrel is sitting at the site, looking for someone who will shoot at him, so that he can immediately respond with a shell or a machine gun burst. But why aren't ours firing? Maybe the anti-tank gun crews are dead. The tank has already passed the minefield and, gaining speed, begins to make a turn to the left, freeing the passage for another, following it just a few meters away. But suddenly it jumps up sharply, shrouded in smoke. "I've hit a mine! I've got one!" I shout to those standing next to me. On the left side of the highway, the enemy tanks cross the passage for some reason freely. The second one has already passed it. Turns around, favourably exposing its left side for our anti-tankers. The infantry on the run also begins to roll up in columns by squads and, pouring fire from automatic rifles into our defence, rushes to the passages after the tanks. "Why doesn't anyone shoot? Infantry. At least infantry should be cut off from the tanks," I shout to Akatiev. He, in turn, covering the tube with his hand, shouts something to someone on the phone. I see how the infantry from other areas also begins to roll up and run to that free passage. What is Yelinsky? Why no fire? But on the first pass, Hitlerites start some kind of fuss. I look through binoculars. The crew of the wounded tank, having jumped out of the hatches, hooks it with a cable, and the one following it tries to tow it, to free the passage. "Captain Zhdanev, fire on the passages," I command. "You can't, Comrade Combat. We can hit our own," then cut off the infantry behind the passages. In front of the first company, enemy infantry meanwhile lay down, and the tanks, having lost one hit, withdrew and hid behind the folds of the terrain. The third company was still firing heavily. In front of its positions, the tanks stopped, now pouring machine gun fire on everything they see. Yes, here they were given a decent fight back. There is one tank on fire, another, having lowered the cannon down, also frozen in place. And in the area of the second company's defence, something incomprehensible is still going on. Already 3 fascist tanks have passed through the passage, turned around and now approaching our first trench, firing on the move. And a whole column of infantry is running after them. They're now at least a couple of machine guns. Involuntarily bursts out of me. But what is it? The column of enemy infantry begins to scatter in different directions. Some soldiers rush back to the passage, others flounder on the spot and fall. Tanks also slow down. Panic among the advancing enemy, explains Akatiev. Running up to me, he shouts, "I've just talked to Yelinsky. He has heavy losses. Broke 2 machine guns and 1 anti-tank gun. I ordered him to gather together all the machine gunners, machine guns, anti-tank rifles, move a little to the right and forward and hit the fascists in the flank." Now he's striking. Well, that's the right order. Akatiev had matured during these weeks of fighting. Matured. But we've all learned a lot. And yet it's still bad in the second company. Having recovered from the shock, up to a platoon of fascist infantrymen have already broken into the first trench, and 3 tanks are rushing to the second. Mine passage overcome and the rest of the vehicles. It is necessary to do something urgently to save at least the rest of the company. But there is a way out, to set fire to the rubble. Fire will stun the enemy, delay him for a while. And there, but will our cunning work against tanks? I give the command, and in a few minutes in front of the second trench of Yelinsky's company went up in flames. Hitlerites stopped, began to wait. Tanks did not go into the fire either, they began to turn aside. And that's when... Yes, we were preparing for it. Our anti-tank artillery immediately hit the sides of the turning vehicles. The first shells set fire to 2 of the 3 TVs that broke through. The third hurried back and took cover in the ravine. Increased fire and the remnants of the second company. They beat the fascist infantry in the passage and in front of it, then a friendly rush to push the enemy machine gunners from their first trench. But the battle does not end there. On the left, the 2nd Battalion fiercely repulses Hitlerite attacks. Its defence is covered with smoke and dust. There is no possibility to clarify the situation there. There was no communication with the regiment headquarters during the enemy artillery preparation. The 2 communicators I sent to the line have not returned yet. Maybe they are no longer alive, and the enemy attacks on our battalion were getting stronger and stronger. Soon a critical situation developed in the 3rd Rifle Company. There were very few men left in the line. Almost all machine guns were damaged. We need to correct the situation. Akatiev, I shout to the adjutant of the battalion, run to the reserve platoon. Take him, 2 anti-tank guns, and quickly, in the 2nd trench of the 3rd Company. We have to help her stop the Nazis, got it? Yes, got it. Akatiev disappeared behind the turn of the message line. A messenger from the firing platoon, to me. An artilleryman ran up. Tell the platoon commander, all tanks that will break through on the highway as well as to the right, hit him. Tell him he's responsible for this with his head. Yes, sir. A messenger from the machine gun platoon, tell the commander to destroy the enemy infantry that has broken through. The rifle platoon went to the left flank. Yes, sir. The soldier ran to fulfill the order. A messenger to the tankers, tell Senior Lieutenant Kovalev to concentrate the tanks at the highway. Don't let a single enemy vehicle pass along it. He'll be supported by a firing platoon. Yes, sir. Captain Zhdanev, cut off the infantry from the tanks on the approach to the passages. Understood, answered Zhdanev. And then his command sounded. Everybody halt. The site is smaller. Brizantnaya. Division. Fire. Watch the ruptures in front of the 3rd Company. He shouted to me. I brought binoculars to my eyes. I saw how in a few seconds in front of the company's defences, at a height of 1.5 to 2 metres from the ground, bursts of brisant grenades. The fragments literally mowed down the enemy's living force. Shouted Zhdanev, "That's just right, more fire. 2 shells fleeing," continued to command the captain. In front of the 1st Company, Hitler's infantry was already entrenched, conducting only rare machine gun and machine gun fire. Is there a connection with the 1st Company? Yes, Comrade Combat, reported J.P. Brailovsky and handed me the phone. After returning to Akatiev's battalion, he again took command of the communications platoon. How are you, Zharikov? I asked the commander of the 1st Company on the phone. Normally, Comrade Combat. The first attack repulsed, cheerfully answered the one. Well done, but do not think that the fascists will rest on this. You see how they are pressing on your neighbours? That's right. Get ready. Where's the commander of the mortar company? Nearby. Put him on the phone. Lieutenant Junior. Lieutenant Shapovalov is on the phone. Shapovalov, do you see an accumulation of enemy infantry in front of the 2nd Company? I see it. Why don't you fire at it? But I'm supporting the 1st. Immediately fire in front of the 2nd. Understood? I'm watching your bursts. Understood. But there is a way out, to set fire to the rubble. Fire will stun the enemy, delay him for a while. And there, but will our cunning work against tanks? I give the command, and in a few minutes in front of the 2nd trench of Ilinsky's company went up in flames. Hitlerites stopped, began to wait. Tanks did not go into the fire either, they began to turn aside. And that's when... Yes, we were preparing for it. Our anti-tank artillery immediately hit the sides of the turning vehicles. The first shells set fire to 2 of the 3 TVs that broke through. The 3rd hurried back and took cover in the ravine. Increased fire and the remnants of the 2nd Company. They beat the fascist infantry in the passage and in front of it, then a friendly rush to push the enemy machine gunners from their first trench. But the battle does not end there. On the left, the 2nd Battalion fiercely repulses Hitlerite attacks. Its defence is covered with smoke and dust. There is no possibility to clarify the situation there. There was no communication with the regiment headquarters during the enemy artillery preparation. The 2 communicators I sent to the line have not returned yet. Maybe they are no longer alive. And the enemy attacks on our battalion were getting stronger and stronger. Soon a critical situation developed in the 3rd Rifle Company. There were very few men left in the line. Almost all machine guns were damaged. We need to correct the situation. Akatiev, I shout to the adjutant of the battalion, run to the reserve platoon. Take him, 2 anti-tank guns, and quickly, in the 2nd trench of the 3rd Company. We have to help her stop the Nazis, got it? Yes, got it. Akatiev disappeared behind the turn of the message line. A messenger from the firing platoon, to me. An artilleryman ran up. Tell the platoon commander, all tanks that will break through on the highway as well as to the right, hit him. Tell him he's responsible for this with his head. Yes, sir. A messenger from the machine gun platoon, tell the commander to destroy the enemy infantry that has broken through. The rifle platoon went to the left flank. Yes, sir. The soldier ran to fulfill the order. A messenger to the tankers, tell Senior Lieutenant Kovalev to concentrate the tanks at the highway. Don't let a single enemy vehicle pass along it. He'll be supported by a firing platoon. Yes, sir. Captain Zhdanev, cut off the infantry from the tanks on the approach to the passages. Understood, answered Zhdanev. And then his command sounded. Everybody halt. The site is smaller. Brizantnaya. Division. Fire. Watch the ruptures in front of the 3rd Company, he shouted to me. I brought binoculars to my eyes. I saw how in a few seconds in front of the company's defences, at a height of 1.5 to 2 metres from the ground, bursts of brisant grenades. The fragments literally mowed down the enemy's living force. Shouted Zhdanev, "That's just right, more fire. 2 shells fleeing," continued to command the captain. In front of the 1st Company, Hitler's infantry was already entrenched, conducting only rare machine gun and machine gun fire. Is there a connection with the 1st Company? Yes, Comrade Combat, reported J.P. Brailovsky and handed me the phone. After returning to Akatiev's battalion, he again took command of the communications platoon. How are you, Zharikov? I asked the commander of the 1st Company on the phone. Normally, Comrade Combat. The first attack repulsed, cheerfully answered the one. Well done, but do not think that the fascists will rest on this. You see how they are pressing on your neighbours? That's right. Get ready. Where's the commander of the mortar company? Nearby. Put him on the phone. Lieutenant Junior. Lieutenant Shapovalov is on the phone. Shapovalov, do you see an accumulation of enemy infantry in front of the 2nd Company? I see it. Why don't you fire at it? But I'm supporting the 1st. Immediately fire in front of the 2nd. Understood? I'm watching your bursts. Understood. The conclusion from this was self-evident. In the morning we should wait for the main blow on the right flank of the battalion and the neighbour on the right, 51st Regiment. I warned company commanders and Senior Lieutenant Kovalev about it, moved the reserve platoon to the right of the highway. The dawn dawned hesitantly. A strong, penetrating northwest wind blew. It lifted myriads of snowflakes into the air, swirled them, carried them along the snowy ground in a Pozemkoi. And today, brothers, it's not flying weather again. Good, said the Commissar, looking up. Hearing these words, all those who were at the observation post cheerfully murmured. Such is the character of our man. He needs very little. Just a few warm words, some share of hope, and he has already revived, cheered up, forgotten about hardships and misfortune. Today, too, no enemy aviation will hang over his head, bombing and machine gun fire, and he is already cheerful from the consciousness that he is lucky. Soon it dawned completely, but another hour and a second passed, and the fascists still did not show any activity. Even thought, maybe their offensive today will not be at all. But at 10 o'clock and 15 minutes, the enemy artillery covered with shells simultaneously both the front edge and the depth of the battalion's defence, and such treatment went on without interruption for about half an hour. After the artillery preparation, up to 2 German battalions supported by 12 tanks went on the offensive. The assumption that the Nazis would strike their main blow on the right flank of the battalion and the neighbour on the right was justified. One enemy battalion was advancing on our first company and partially captured the second company. The other, having found a small gap in the junction with the 51st Regiment, began to be drawn into it. This threatened the Nazis to come to our rear. I immediately called the regiment commander and expressed my concern. Captain Sadiq listened to me and then said, "Hold on with your own strength. I can't help you. I have nothing. I ask at least one company from the battalion of the 2nd Echelon to transfer here." I insisted. "I can't. Hold on, Komulo." And the regiment commander hung up the phone. "What shall we do, Commissar?" I turned to Ivan Ivanovich. "What will we use to close the hole at the junction? Rifle and machine gun platoons from the reserve are not enough to stop the whole battalion's advance." "Yes, business." Ivan Ivanovich stretched out anxiously, but immediately said firmly, "We will stand to the death. 2 platoons are also a force, Mikhail. Throw them in there." He called me by name for the first time, and with this, as if emphasized the seriousness of the moment and his faith in me, the commander. And I made up my mind, ordered the adjutant, "Junior Lieutenant Akatiev, send both reserve platoons to the right flank, at the very end of the second trench, machine guns to open fire only when the enemy expose their flank. Personally deploy the men and give them a task. Yes, comrade combat. There would be a platoon of 45mm guns, but as long as they roll them on their hands, especially under such a fire. What if Senior Lieutenant Kovalev will move to the right flank with 2 tanks? That would be a support for the platoons." I urgently call Captain Sadiq and report about my idea. "It's risky to remove Kovalev from the highway," answers the regiment commander. "But the fascists will come to our rear, including Kovalev. All right, give him my order. But look, as soon as something happens, tanks back to the highway." While we were negotiating, the enemy tanks had already approached the passages in the minefields. Against the first company they marked 2, and to them went 6 tanks. At the junction with the neighbour on the right, also on 2 passes, again 6. Against the 2nd and 3rd companies were advancing 1 infantry. Yes, the German sappers still had a lot of time during the night. But we missed. Urgently correct the situation. It's not up to Kovalev. I'm calling Captain Sadiq again. "Well, what else have you got?" With obvious irritation asks him. I report to him in detail the current situation in front of the battalion's defence and at the junction with the right neighbour. I say that I decided not to contact Kovalev. Anyway, his tanks will not have time. "Then what do you suggest?" Already more calmly spoke the regimental commander. "I ask 1 company from the reserve to cover the junction with the neighbour on the right, and more. Let the commander of the 51st Regiment also put forward a company. It's not too late. The company will have time to take the defence and we'll stop the enemy. I give my word." I hurry to tell him my thought. The captain breathed silently into the tube for a while. He was thinking. This pause, which lasted a few seconds, seemed to me an eternity. "All right, I'll send a company," I heard at last at the other end of the wire. "Meet it and place it personally. But look, not a single fascist should not go further than your second trench. You answer with your head. Yes, but I want a neighbour too. But the regiment commander has already hung up. "I've given you a company," I shouted to the commissar. "Stay here, Ivan Ivanovich. Act according to the situation, and I'll meet the company and escort it to the place."